So we already talked about kind of coming up with the most probable selling price. It all depends on who you're selling it to. That's one of the first questions I always want to ask is like, what's it worth? Well, to whom, right? Best person to sell it to is always going to be the strategics. Raph here, Zatara Transaction Advisors, based here out of Saskatoon. Good morning. I just want to go over another big benefit to our valuations, and that's the buyer insights. So we already talked about kind of coming up with the most probable selling price, but it all depends on who you're selling it to, right? That's one of the first questions I always want to ask is like, what's it worth? Well, to whom, right? So we'll start with the family transfer. Family transfer obviously is not obvious, but most of the time it's going to probably be the lowest. Your kids are going to want to pay the least amount for the business. So there's a problem. Obviously, you can kind of make it up with like a vendor note where you basically just finance it for the kids and you take the money out each year. You take the majority of the profit, and then after 5 years or 6 years, it's theirs. Right? So you can often get more that way, but your kids, if they're going to go get a loan, they're going to pay the least amount. Just is what it is. Some of the pros, though, are, you got to preserve your legacy. It's a lower cost, more control, less disruption. And then the buyer might not exist. They are a buyer. If it's a business that's unsaleable, well, at least there's a buyer there. The cons is family dynamics, lack of funds. They don't have any money. Lowest sale price, key employee flight risk. Obviously, the employees that have been there forever, that have helped grow the business, the last thing they want to see is some kid who hasn't done anything take over the business. So the business loses value sometimes whenever you sell it to your kids, and your kids actually often have the lowest probability of success. All that being said, if it's big enough and the operations are tight, it may not matter, but a lot of times they can destroy the value of the business. So keep that in mind. Management buyout, management buy-in. They're a good buyer. They're not going to pay as much because they don't have as much money. They're good buyers, and it's important because it kind of aligns the business, and you have somebody that already knows how to run the business, running the business to grow it. Right? Only they're getting a chunk of the value they create. So they're highly incentivized to grow the business. Partners, this is you buying out another partner or a partner buying you out. Again, they know where all the skeletons are in the closet. Same with your management, right? They know where all the skeletons are in the closet, and often they're gonna want to pay, not the least amount, but kind of on the lower end. They were with you for the whole time. So if you're buying them out or they're buying you out, there's a bit of respect there, but they aren't going to pay the highest amount. ESOPs, great way to raise capital. You give the employees an opportunity to buy in. The lawyers set it all up, and then the employees buy in, and the shares are revalued annually, and the buyout is complete over however long. All right, so it's a great way to raise capital from your staff. Same with your management buy-in or buyout. If they're buying in, it's a great way to raise capital from the management. First-time owner-operator, this is another one. They'll pay basically less than the employees and the partners and the shareholders because they're just getting in, and they got kind of 4 things that they want to do, which is they want to earn a decent living, it's an owner-operator, a decent living. They're going to want a return on their capital. They need a bit extra to grow the thing, and it's got to be able to service the debt. So they're going to pay less than management buy-in, partner buyout, ESOPs. It's worth the least, not the least to them, but it's worth less to them. Serial owner operator, these guys bring some value to the equation, and so if they like the business, they can bring their own spin, their own value. They can create value in the business, and so they're willing to pay a bit more than your first time buyer. Your first time buyer is going to be more risk averse. They're going to have less money, and so they're not going to be able to pay as much for the business, right? Whereas a serial owner operator, they've bought a couple businesses, exited a couple businesses. If they have a clear plan for creating value within the business, they can afford to pay a bit more, right? Individual investor, similar to the serial owner operator, they're buying the business to get a return on capital, and they're similar to like a private equity firm, only it's a one-person private equity firm or a couple people private equity firm type thing. So they're going to be able to bring a bit of value to the business, but for the most part, they're going to be hands off. Whereas this serial owner operator is really somebody that is used to buying companies and adding value, right? Financial buyers, these are kind of your private equity firms, family offices, search funds. Search funds are a little bit more, they're looking for bigger businesses than the individual investor. Generally, they raise capital from however many people to buy businesses, and they're financial buyers, and they're going to be able to pay, a little bit more, but not much more than an individual investor. And that's because they've got resources, right? They got more resources. All that being said, this financial buyer needs to have a bunch of systems and stuff in place because they're financial buyers. They deploy capital. They don't operate. Whereas an individual investor may have some operational experience. This serial owner operator clearly has operational experience. This first time owner operator may or may not have operational experience. And so because they got more money, often they can pay pretty close to the same amount as these guys, but not a huge amount more. The best person to sell to is always going to be the strategics. So this is guys that they're growing their core business and they're acquiring kind of bolt-ons. And so they're looking at unique values within your business. And they can fix a lot of the operational problems within your business because they already have a strong operating business that they're just bolting gears onto. And another reason why they can afford to pay more is because you got to look at it as essentially revenue synergies and cost synergies, right? So revenue synergies are, we've got customers X, customers Y. We've got products Y, products X. Well, we can sell products X to customer Y and products Y to customer X. And so those two are going to create this geometric revenue synergy, ideally, in theory. And then on the bottom line for the operational stuff, well, they can get rid of a lot of the operational expenses. Like payroll, HR, marketing, all those things, they already have that. So they can get rid of a lot of those things. And yeah, some of the cons are, I guess, they're probably gonna gut the brand. They're just gonna roll it into their brand. But this is the easiest to finance because they often have financing lined up. And not only that, but they got a track record. And the due diligence is going to be really smooth because typically they're an industry buyer. Minority control, this is kind of where somebody buys a minority stake in the business. Nice thing is you can sell part of the business and keep part of the business. You might be able to also raise financing that way. So you might be able to sell a minority share of the business to an investor to raise capital if you want to, I don't know, go buy a building or buy equipment or whatever you're looking to do. This is raising equity, right? And then recapitalization would be, this is where you're selling a chunk of the company in order to go and live your life, right? Yeah. And then you can liquidate the thing. And obviously, most of the time, the business is going to have the least value liquidating it. So basically, in order of operations, it would basically go, the worst thing to do is liquidate it. The second least payout is the family transfer. The third would be the management buyout, buy-in, partner buyout, ESOP. And then next you have kind of your first-time buyers. And then you have your serial buyers and your financial buyers. And then you at the top is your strategics. Your strategics are often, almost always, going to pay you more than anybody else. So whenever I take a business to market, I always look for strategics. I build a list of strategics, and that's who I present the business to. So anyways, that gives you kind of an idea of how we think about selling your business, and it kind of puts you in the buyer's shoes, and understands, okay, how do we position the business for each one of these categories and what are they willing to pay? And the internal ones are kind of, the nice thing is the buyer's there. You don't really need, like, you somewhat need help structuring it and everything and selling the team, bringing the team in. But they don't really need to do a huge amount of diligence because they're already in the business. So those transactions are going to be easier, and they're going to actually be less risky transactions in a lot of ways, obviously, except for this family one, just because the last thing somebody wants to see that's given you 25 years and is now running the company, the last thing they want to see is some kid who's got a year out of university who's now the big boss. So that's one of my favorite parts of our valuation. And obviously for us, the number one person we want to sell this business to, or number one group of people we want to sell this business to, are strategics. Which, again, the easiest way you can think of strategics is kind of like a lateral. So it'd be somebody with that serves the same customer base, right? That isn't a direct competitor. So I don't know. Think of it as oil changes and tire shop, right? So an oil change and a tire shop share the same customer, right? But they don't directly compete with each other. And then, your direct competitor, so oil change to oil change, and then your strategic, which would be lube manufacturer to oil change, and then your strategic kind of down the chain, a vertical, but down the chain would be maybe like a car dealership buying your oil change. The reason they're doing that is because they need a bunch of oil changes, and so it's easier for them to own an oil change and just drive and get the oil change there. It may be. That might be a bad example, but you get the idea. So anyways, that's kind of the list of all the buyer types we have and who's willing to pay what, and so what you're likely to walk away with depending on who you sell it to. And I don't think most other valuations have that, because most people selling valuations aren't actually selling companies, right? So the reason we sell valuations is to figure out what we're going to be able to sell the company for, and to set expectations of here's what's reasonable depending on the risk of the business. Obviously, we can fix the business, make it a better business. We're going to get a higher price for that. And then who are we going to sell it to? And let's start identifying who those people are and setting the expectations of, well, if we sell it to, first time owner operator, we're likely to get an offer like this because this is probably what they're going to be able to afford to offer. This guy's bought a couple businesses, blah, blah, blah. Okay, he's probably going to offer this. So it's also a good way for us to negotiate, I guess. It's a good way for us to put ourselves in their shoes and understand how they're going to pay for the business. Or how, yeah, there you go. Anyways, kid, God bless you. Raph, Zatara Transaction Advisors. Ciao.